My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Dickens Video 31, A Ballad. So here is my novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. So this diagram doesn't come through clearly on screen, I don't think, but John is standing on one side. On the other side of the room, Dickens' writing room, is Dickens, who is surrounded by his characters. Writer John Passfield leaves his home, buys a coffee, and drives down to the shores of Lake Erie to perform a Christmas ritual, strolling along the beach at Port Maitland. It's something he's done for many years, but this year is different. This year, John suddenly finds himself in the writing room of famed Victorian novelist Charles Dickens, who sets out his new idea for a Christmas tale. Dickens invites John to watch rehearsals for the writing of the story, but as Dickens struggles through contentious negotiations with his amazingly independent characters, John wonders whether A Christmas Carol will ever be written. So that's the mystery of this mystery novella. A ballad is a poem which is often sung. Often ballads are topical. That is, they are created in order to comment on a current event. In my novels and novellas, a ballad is a technical means of presenting the imagery of the story, what I call deepening imagery. Deepening imagery suggests that a topic can be thought about in terms of various themes, that one's own character and situation can be compared and contrasted to other characters and situations which share similar ideas and emotions. In this novella, there are 4 chapters in which the ballad appears. As with typical ballads, each chapter contains a repeating chorus and a new verse. So let's have a look then. Chapter 3 is the first chapter in which this ballad occurs, and here's the first verse. Actually, it's the chorus that comes first in each case. He knew exactly what he wanted. He wrote it clearly in his will. He wanted his unfinished book to be published, each with a bottle of ink and a quill. Okay, that's the chorus. Here's the first verse over on page 29. That's 2 pages later. He sat down to write a novel. It would be his masterpiece. It would be a murder mystery. It would be a challenging read. Okay, that was chapter 3. Let's skip a chapter and go to chapter 5. And we'll go to page 49. And again, we get the chorus, as you do in these old ballads. He knew exactly what he wanted. He wrote it clearly in his will. He wanted his unfinished book to be published, each with a bottle of ink and a quill. Okay, then a couple of pages later, page 53, we get a new verse. Here it is. All the clues would be well hidden, doppelgangers by the score, red herrings strewn on the pathways, cul-de-sacs on a moonless night. That was chapter 5. Then we go to chapter 7, page 69. And the chorus again. He knew exactly what he wanted. He wrote it clearly in his will. He wanted his unfinished book to be published, each with a bottle of ink and a quill. Then to page 72, a couple of pages later, another verse. Perhaps the author would be the victim. Perhaps the author would wield the knife. Perhaps the author would be the detective. Perhaps the author would not be involved. Okay, then chapter 9, the last chapter in which this appears. Now, imagery comments on imagery, so the imagery of this ballad is commenting on, evaluating, monitoring the imagery of the larger story. Page 89. He knew exactly what he wanted. He wrote it clearly. In his will, he wanted his unfinished book to be published, each with a bottle of ink and a quill. And then lastly, the last verse, page 93, here we are. Half of the book would be printed pages, all that the reader would need to know. The second half would be empty pages, lying in wait for the reader to fill. So that's the last verse. I'm going to read that again. Half of the book would be printed pages, all that the reader would need to know. The second half would be empty pages, lying in wait for the reader to fill. So the author writes the first half of the book. It's printed with blank pages after that. The reader gets a bottle of ink and a quill pen, and the reader writes the second half of the book. Well, on to a general note about literature. I shouldn't say anything, but when you read a book, you are, in a sense, writing the book, right? Because it becomes your book. You're a unique reader. You're not like any other reader, so you create the book, in a sense, in your mind as you read it, right? So, but it means more than that, I'm sure. Okay, here's a general note about literature, okay? Connected, but not obviously connected to what I've just read. When I was a boy, I sat in a grade 9 English class. I'd be about 13 years old. And during the teaching with Shakespeare play, which I remember as 12th night, a question was asked. One of the students wondered why the characters in the play were speaking in poetry. So the teacher asked the class why people didn't write plays anymore in which the characters spoke in poetry. I was a very shy boy, but I remember putting up my hand and answering the question. My answer was, because we wouldn't believe it. The teacher accepted my answer as the right one, because we wouldn't believe it if people spoke in poetry. But when I think about the conversation now, the teacher and the students and I weren't actually talking about belief at all. What we were talking about was the familiarity of convention, okay? Not belief, but convention. By convention, I mean the forms and techniques by which we present and receive our fiction, whether our serious fiction or our entertainment fiction. A number of years later, when I was a young teacher of English literature, I took a record called Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris into my classroom and played some songs for my students. Most of them agreed that they didn't care for the songs. When I pointed out to them, what I pointed out to them at that time was that they didn't care for the conventions by which the songs were being presented. They were a rock and roll generation and had their own conventions by which their music was presented to them. And the Jacques Brel songs were being presented in what I would call a European cabaret convention. When I handed out the printed lyrics of the Jacques Brel songs, the students could see and agreed that the Brel songs weren't about things that were all that different from their own concerns, the ideas and emotions of their own music. In the year 2023, in which I'm presenting this video reading, we have 3 generations of rock and roll music listeners. The grandparents, of which I am one, the parents, and the teenagers. And it's a common observation that with only a few exceptions, most people in a generation love the music of their own time and don't care for the music of another generation's time. Once again, if we look at what the music is actually saying in terms of the lyrics, there's very little difference. What is different are the conventions by which the music is being presented. What I would add to this discussion, though, is that the convention of having Shakespeare's characters speak in poetry was not just a case of a congenial means of entertainment, as in the difference between, say, country music and opera. Country music and opera are saying the same things in terms of their lyrics, while prose plays and poetic plays present this difference. Okay, so If you look at the love songs of country music and opera on paper, in print, they look very similar. You listen to them using their musical conventions, they sound very different. Okay, now Shakespeare's different. I'll read that last line again. Prose plays and poetic plays present this difference. Number one, 2 dashes, but I'll use numbers. Number one, prose plays present the surface thoughts of the characters as they respond to their situations and nothing more. While 2, poetic plays present the surface thoughts of the characters in their stories, but they also present the deeper thoughts of the characters in their stories, the subconscious thoughts of which the characters might or might not be aware. So that's the Shakespeare convention. He'll give you not only the surface things you think and say, he'll give you the surface things you think and say, and the deeper thoughts that are subconscious that you might not even be aware you are thinking. Prose literature tells us that there's nothing going on in our minds. Prose literature tells us that there's nothing going on in our minds beyond what we can see and talk about. Poetic literature tells us there's a lot more going on in our minds than we can see and talk about, and that the subconscious mind is busy thinking in imagery about the surface life experiences through which we're living in an attempt, a gallant attempt, sometimes successful and sometimes tragic, to understand the lives that we are living. Okay, so this is my novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. It's available on Amazon. You can have a look there. It's available at my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com, where there's information. At my website, johnpassfield.ca, there's 2 free books, the Dickens Planning Notebook and the Reflective Journal. Both offer a lot of thoughts about not only Dickens and A Christmas Carol, but about writing in general and literature in general. So have a look if you're interested in those topics. And lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.